From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Featured on this week's cattle market segment, Derrell of Oklahoma State University. He'll report on a positive start to the new year for wholesale beef prices, and he'll comment on the new Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership now in effect. Absent the U.S., what that means for the U.S. cattle sector. Also today, K-State's Bob Weaber will talk about the upcoming series of K-State Winter Ranch Management Seminars. And he'll invite you cow-calf producers to take part in a survey on beef genetic technology utilization. And Jeff Wickman will be in with this week's 4-H segment, where he'll talk with K-State's Aliah Mestrovich Seay about STEM education for underrepresented and at-risk youth. All this and more straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
For you now on Agriculture Today, our cattle market segment for the week. And for this, we once again catch up with a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell. And Derrell, there's quite a bit going on in these markets, although it may be sort of flowing under the surface. But one of the things that seems to have the market's full attention is the eventual implications of the recent winter weather, which we've had in spades in the Central Plains of late.
Yeah, that's right. We've had lots of weather issues, and it has potentially both demand and supply impacts. So it's always a little tricky to sort out or net out what those impacts will be. But clearly on the production side, we've had lots of snow in some areas that have affected cattle producers in general, but especially feedlot cattle in terms of the immediate meat market effects. In other places, maybe not so much snow, but just wet, sloppy conditions. Lots of wet cattle, wet hair coats, which really messes up performance. And so that's going to delay marketings. It tends to tighten up short-run supplies. And actually, so far, USDA reports beef production for the year to date, for the first 3 weeks or so of the year, is actually down year over year. And some of that is probably partly due to that.
But how much this actually resonates in the markets, we've had bad winters before, or at least adverse winters. And so it really is an intangible here as to what this will really mean in the relative near term, right?
It is. It's hard to say. It's like a lot of other, weather events or even, some disaster events. It's kind of surprising how big and how widespread they have to be and sometimes how prolonged they have to be to really provoke an obvious impact that we can measure. That said, we know there are impacts. And so clearly on the production side, we're going to see some delays in marketing here. It's probably helping to hold carcass weights down. We'll confirm that when we get data flowing again. Mm-hmm. And, on the demand side, of course, we've had lots of winter weather, particularly in the population centers of the Northeast, and folks don't get out as much. They don't go to restaurants as much. They're not traveling as much in this kind of weather. That also it bogs things down. And on top of all of that, we're still in January here, so we're still trying to get a beat on sort of how we came out of the holiday period. And so I think there's a number of unknowns here, but the bottom line is there are some impacts out there that we'll probably sort out over the next few days and weeks.
In a few moments, we want to get into some information and some thoughts that you've put together regarding the wholesale beef market. But you mentioned data flow. This past Friday, January 25th, a monthly cattle on feed report was due out. That's gone by the wayside. A cattle inventory report due out later this week, and that probably won't be materializing on time either. So this absence of data is still a concern.
Well, it is, and hopefully we get things moving now, get back on track. The cattle on feed report for January, I'm guessing will not happen. It's already time almost to do the February survey and catch back up this month. The annual inventory numbers are very important, and I presume we will get those at some point, although I have not seen any announcement to that effect, but it will certainly be delayed, and so we will continue to wait for that data.
If there were to have been a cattle on feed report this past Friday, Derrell, what would you have supposed it would have told us?
Well, there were some pre-report estimates put out, and there was a wide range of expectations in general. But the idea of another month of relatively tight placements and holding that cattle on feed inventory somewhere in around 102% of or 2% above a year ago level. So again, over the last several months, we've kind of tightened that back up. We're still up slightly year over year, but really not up very much relative to the sustained expansion that we've had. And so, we've moved cattle through the system pretty well, and I think that sets up why these markets are starting off 2019 in relatively good condition.
Mm-hmm. And again, the cattle inventory report eventually will materialize, and your general thinking is that we will see maybe a very modest increase in the inventory, but at a quite slow pace?
Yeah, that's been my expectation all year, and as we watch the slaughter numbers through the year, that's still my expectation is that we'll probably confirm that we increased the beef cow herd just slightly, somewhere 0.5% or so, could be on either side of that a little bit for 2018, and then we'll be watching going forward. The indications from the slaughter numbers would suggest, and so we'll look at these replacement heifers, for example, as an indication that we may see virtually no growth in 2019. Really a plateau. I don't really expect significant liquidation either. I think we're just going to kind of reach a plateau here and sort of flatten out at least for 1 year. That would be my expectation at this point.
All right. Well, again, you've put together some detailed thoughts on the wholesale beef market starting 2019. The overview here is that it's been a steady run of strong prices as we convert into the new year.
It has, and in fact, if you look at the overall cutout value for the past week, actually increased about $5 over 5 or 6 days' time. So we've continued to see a strong overall cutout, and when you break that cutout down over the first 2 or 3 weeks of the year, you really see pretty strong values, particularly with the middle meats, which is where the bulk of the value lies in the rib and the loin. We've continued to see those middle meats running very strong. A little bit more volatility, a little bit more up and down nature to the end meats, the chuck and the round. But overall, a very strong set of values for those primals that is supporting that cutout value and would suggest that we're, starting off 2019 in pretty good shape with these wholesale beef markets.
Now, lurking in the shadows, these ongoing concerns that maybe the general economy could be paring back some from its strength the last couple of years into 2019, and that's always related back to beef demand. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've sort of held my breath for a few months now about the possibility that we could see demand take a hit indirectly through the general economy, both the U.S. macroeconomy and the global economy. Obviously, the trade issues continue to hang over the market and have generally shaved some off of our expectations for global GDP growth. And the most recent factor on top of that, of course, was the shutdown, which also aggravates the potential for GDP growth in the U.S. So, that said, we just said beef demand has been strong, wholesale values have been strong, and so this may temper that. If we were to see a more significant hiccup in macroeconomic conditions, then that could be a threat to beef demand, and it's certainly something we'll keep an eye on as we go forward.
No question. And on the trade front, which we talk about virtually every time we visit these days, this is our first chance to chat with you in 2019 about the trade outlook and a lot of variables in play here, NAFTA, China. What has your attention there in specific, Derrell?
Well, I think the biggest factor for me all along has just been the uncertainty that goes with this. But, one of the points I've made recently in an article was noting that it's a very dynamic situation. And sometimes it seems like nothing's really changing, at least in terms of policy. We're not really resolving things yet. We may get to some point here pretty quick. But the rest of the world continues, whether or not we're part of it. So one of the things that happened on January 1 was the residual TPP TPP, I guess that's a U.S. perspective, it's the TPP that was negotiated before without the U.S., moves into place. So, it's not a case of the U.S. sort of holding position as we go forward relative to that, but we actually lose ground now because those other participating countries will have additional access in these markets. And so, that's not to say how it's all going to play out eventually, and we may get some bilateral deals that offset that. But in the meantime, it's not just a question of sort of holding our own. We're actually losing ground on things like that. The new version of NAFTA is not yet ratified, not yet in place, and of course the steel and aluminum tariffs that were put on outside of NAFTA are still in place. And so there's just a number of issues here that have yet to be resolved as we go forward.
And you mentioned the, as you put it, residual TPP, which maybe doesn't get as much limelight as the Chinese issue or the new NAFTA, but especially when you think about a country like Japan, which has been a huge consumer of U.S. beef over the years, that being in any kind of jeopardy would be disconcerting to the U.S. beef sector, it would seem.
Certainly so. Japan is our biggest beef export customer, and again, with this new version of TPP in place, the U.S. becomes less competitive relative to other countries in that market, and so probably won't see dramatic immediate impacts, but again, over time, those impacts will accumulate, and so the burden and the challenge is even higher for the U.S. market to continue competing effectively in that market.
Yeah, pivotal times ahead on the U.S. trade front with its relevance to the beef sector. So finally, Derrell, as you look at this trading week ahead, the fed cattle market, it sort of bounces narrowly to and fro, but really isn't breaking either way of late. Is that a pattern that we'll see continue for a time?
I wouldn't be surprised. We've seen the fed cattle market hold pretty steady. Again, it's been supported, I think, by some of these weather impacts, and I think we'll continue to see some of that going forward. And again, there's just a lot of uncertainty as we kind of get back on track, both from the standpoint of weather and travel and other things, as well as, having the data to really kind of bring us back up to speed on exactly where we've been the last few weeks and get back on track with that.
Very well. Always a pleasure to visit, and we'll catch up with you in a few weeks once more. Thanks, Derrell, for the input.
You're very welcome.
From Oklahoma State University, livestock economist Derrell Peel in our regular rotation, looking at the cattle market trends here on Agriculture Today. We'll return in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues. A couple of purposes on this segment, both relating to you cow-calf producers. K-State's series of winter ranch management seminars is coming up quite soon, and producers, you want to take one of these in if you're at all able to do so. We'll tell you the whens and wheres in just a second. We'll also share with you an opportunity to lend information to researchers about technology utilization in cow-calf production. Along with us now is Bob Weaber, cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's involved in all of this. 2 of those seminars, 4 of which will take place in Kansas in the month of February. You launched this series several years back, right, Bob?
Yeah, in fact, Eric, this Winter Ranch Management Series, I've been here at K-State, I think 7 or 8 years, since 2011, let's say that. And it was going before I got here. So I think it's actually Larry Hollis was one of the motivators and instigators of the original Winter Ranch Management Program. It's taken kind of a variety of forms over time, but we continue to have a really good following in this particular series. And we try and it used to be kind of a blended sort of a webcast and local audiences to now really it's a face face-to-face meeting. We have 4 locations around the state, and go and meet folks and have that important dialogue. So.
And that interaction is really one of the key components of these, and which we'll share more about in a moment. You've chosen a theme once again for this series, and what is that?
Yeah, we sure have. And the theme for this year's series is really strategies to mitigate environmental factors impacting reproduction, and partially a follow-up from last year's, so 2018's, really variable weather across Kansas. We got our team of extension specialists around the state have had a variety of reports of challenges both during the breeding season or immediately after the breeding season in terms of conception rates in cows, and certainly this fall as producers have gone through preg checking and kind of working their cows this fall, discovering some issues related to kind of trace back in terms of timing to either the hot weather that we had, particularly in mid to late June, was kind of right in the middle of breeding season for a lot of folks, or at a point in time that was maybe 20 to 40 days into gestation on some early bred cows that caused some early embryonic losses in those cows. And so we want to take a little bit of time and talk through some of those challenges on the reproduction side. So Dr. Sandy Johnson, one of our team members from out in western Kansas, is going to talk about environmental factors affecting conception rates. And then Dr. Justin Wagner will talk about forage quality and availability impacts on cow nutrition and during late gestation and pre-breeding.
And that's a topic that is very germane to what's going on.
Yes, yeah. And so one of the things we thought winter ranch management, gives us, we can kind of be retrospective of what happened last year, but then talk about some strategies for the coming year in case we have variable or drought kind of conditions emerge through the spring. And I know one of the challenges we always face is, everybody's eager to turn cows out at green up. And sometimes, depending on if we've got a mixture of cool season or warm season grass, depending which way we go, particularly if we go to warm season grass, sometimes it looks great from the road, but if you go out and walk through those pastures, there's not near as much forage availability as we think. And certainly nutrient quality is relatively low. It's really lush and washy. And so to the cow, that represents a declining plane of nutrition during a really critical breeding period. And so we want to talk through some of those and how we might manage those more effectively moving forward.
But again, one of the focal points of each of these seminars is this open forum, and literally so, where you'll have what's called a town hall discussion.
Right. And so a number of years ago, we actually had the whole series, the whole time slot for the series was town hall Q&A. It was kind of stump the specialist sort of time, we call it. It had a very positive reception, and so we've maintained that component in our meetings the last 2 or 3 years, and so we'll have about an hour of program time that's an open forum. So bring questions because you'll have an opportunity to ask those to our extension team, and we'll have 3, 4, or 5, depending on everybody's calendar and availability, but a breadth of expertise on hand to answer about any question I think you could probably bring.
And those questions do not have to be related to the topic of environmental factors and reproduction.
Right. We can talk about cover crops, we can talk about genetics, anything you want to bring cow-calf related, bring it.
And there are 4 of these taking place. You've tried to disperse these throughout the state, so producers everywhere have a shot at these.
Right. We start off on February 5th, an evening program in Minneapolis. That's a joint effort between Central Kansas, Post Rock, River Valley, and Midway Extension District. So if you go online, you can get the contact information to RSVP for that meeting. We do ask that folks RSVP by January 29 for that meeting, just so we've got a good head count. There's a meal, a light meal at each of these events. And so to make sure we've got adequate supply on hand, if you would please RSVP to those. There's a small registration fee at a number of them to help cover some of those costs as well. Some of them have sponsorships to cover that, but make sure you check with your county or district agent that's helping host to get on the list.
So the first is, again, on the 5th, and registration for that is due tomorrow. And then you've 3 more elsewhere in the state.
Yep. So the next session's February 19th. We actually have 2 that day, one in Jetmore, kind of a lunch, and then early afternoon program, and then that evening in Rush Center, February 19th. Both of those RSVPs, February 12. The Jetmore location, register with Dwayne Craighead at Hodgman County, and Rush Center is hosted with Walnut Creek and Cottonwood Extension Districts, Alicia Bohr and Jared Petersley for the Rush Center location, which is an evening program.
Both of those ones more on the 19th, and the last will be in Central Kansas in McPherson on the 26th.
McPherson on the 26th, and that's, again, a joint effort. McPherson, Harvey, and Marion counties have gone together to host that particular location. Centralized RSVP for that one, if you would, by February 19. Tara at the McPherson County office will be glad to get you on the list.
Very well. And if folks would like to see more about this program, the details are on ksubeef.org. Correct?
Yep, that's right.
Again, that's the lineup for the 2019 K-State Winter Ranch Management Seminar Series at 4 locations. Again, February 5th, Minneapolis, 19th, Jetmore, 19th as well in Rush Center, and February 26th at McPherson. Before we let you go, Bob, we want to let folks know about yet one more opportunity that K-State has partnered with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to conduct a survey of producers to learn more about their understanding and their utilization of technology in their genetics program, right?
Right. So Matt Spangler, a colleague of mine at the University of Nebraska, led a USDA grant proposal that we were successful in landing. Collaborators on there and researchers include 3 scientists from the Meat Animal Research Center at Clay Center, Nebraska, Dr. Snelling, Keene, and Thalman, Bruce Golden with Theta Solutions, and myself are the team that make it up. The project goal is really to develop a customizable selection index platform. So producers can go in and instead of using sort of the generic selection indexes that are driven from breed associations, to actually go in and kind of customize those a little bit based on their own production circumstances and marketing goals, and include sort of system-level decisions relative to, say, crossbreeding systems or different marketing endpoints and the like, and pricing systems. So our goal is to build that, and one of the components of that grant was to really help us understand as extension educators sort of how producers utilize current technology in the form of both computing platforms. So there's a fair bit of questions about sort of your experience and use of a variety of digital platforms, whether that's a personal computer or mobile phone, and kind of what you do with it to kind of gauge how we might build out that particular product offering. And then the rest of the survey is really genetics based. So getting an understanding of kind of the level of detail of additional education experience and training we might need to offer, sort of collateral with the selection index tool. And so an online survey. And we'd sure appreciate everybody's thoughts and feedback. We think this is going to be a really impactful tool. It's a 3-year grant, and so this is really kind of one of our first activities on the grant. And producer feedback will be very important to how we sort of build out that particular selection tool.
Excellent. And the deadline for submitting your input through this survey is this coming Friday, February the 1st. So how does a producer access the survey?
Yeah, great. So the easiest thing is to go online, and we've got a link for the survey at ksubeef.org. And there's a press release and story that's got that link in it. If you just kind of Google beef genetics researchers seek technology utilization, it should come up. So you'll find it.
But a good avenue, once again, go to ksubeef.org to participate in this survey, and once again to pick up on the details on the Winter Ranch Management Seminar Series. Busy times, Bob, so thanks for coming over and sharing a few moments with us.
Thank you, Eric.
Bob Weaber is a cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We'll return shortly with more on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Next for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the Senate and House on Friday did approve via voice vote legislation reopening the partially closed government for 3 weeks through February the 15th. The president signed the measure late Friday. That brings the longest U.S. government shutdown in history to an end. Federal government workers, by the way, are expected to be paid for the period covering the shutdown sometime early this week. Now, the timeline for USDA issuing its delayed reports because of the shutdown should become clear relatively quickly. When the government reopened back on October 17th of 2013, the release of a detailed schedule of when reports would be released was put out. This is likely to be a lengthy list given the length of the shutdown. As for the suite of reports that were to be issued January the 11th, those being the crop production, the 2018 summary, the grain stocks, winter wheat, and canola seedings. Some sources say those could be released next week, while others have suggested they could be released on February the 8th. That is the next regularly scheduled date for the WASDE report. As for the weekly export sales report from the USDA, the public announcements could resume as early as tomorrow. Exporters are required to report to USDA any export sales activity of 100,000 tons or more of one commodity made in one day to one destination by 3 o'clock Eastern Time on the next business day following the sale. Export sales of less than these quantities must be reported to the USDA on a weekly basis. The reopening of the County Farm Service Agency offices nationwide for some activities saw the USDA announce that the sign-up for the Market Facilitation Program payments will be extended to February the 14th. The USDA has now announced several other shutdown-related deadline extensions for several programs. As far as the final acreage reporting date, that report will be considered to be timely filed with no late fee if submitted and filed with the FSA by February the 14th. However, all other provisions to comply with acreage reports have not been changed. Emergency Conservation Program will be considered timely filed, the reporting of performance, if submitted and filed by February the 14th, or a date granted by the FSA State Committee representative, whichever is later. And emergency assistance for livestock notice of loss considered timely filed if by February 14th, as well as the livestock forage program for the 2017 program year. Eligible livestock owners or contract growers with a producer interest in grazed forage crop acreage must submit their completed form and supporting documentation by February the 28th. Livestock Indemnity Program, notice of loss to be submitted and filed by the 14th, and marketing assistance loans. If the loan maturity was in December of 2018, it can be repaid, forfeited, or settled through February the 14th. Requests for loan deficiency payments will be considered timely filed if the loan availability date of January the 31st, if filed by February the 28th. Now, we plan to have on the broadcast tomorrow the State Director of the Farm Service Agency here in Kansas, David Shem, to provide more information on the resumption of FSA business locally. So be listening for that. Want to remind you producers in western Kansas in particular that K-State Research and Extension will be hosting this week that series of risk-assessed marketing workshops focusing on limited irrigated corn in western Kansas. These will take place tomorrow in Ulysses, Wednesday in Scott City, and Thursday in Colby. Now, they will cover these topics as we look at the constraints on subsurface irrigation water supplies in western Kansas and the need to understand how limited irrigation crop insurance works with written agreements used in farmers' pre-harvest crop risk management strategies. The agenda includes limited irrigation crop insurance tools. The RMA's Sean Beach will take a look at those. Also, there will be a look at corn market basis, forward contracting, futures hedge, and option opportunities. K-State's own Dan O'Brien to cover that. And an update on the Farm Bill, the first look at Farmers 2019 PLC versus ARC choices. K-State's Monty Vanderveer will address that. And then the afternoon of the sessions will include the introduction of a case farm exercise, and all producers attending will be able to walk through that exercise to have an idea of risk management strategies that will work for them. The workshop will conclude around 3:30 in the afternoon. The pre-registration fee, if you get this done right away, $15 per person. It'll be $25 at the door if not pre-registered. Again, K-State's risk-assessed marketing workshops. The focus there, limited irrigation corn in western Kansas. One is set for tomorrow in Ulysses, on Wednesday in Scott City, and Thursday at Colby. You can find out more information at agmanager.info or ask further at the local extension offices in those locales. Time now for this week's edition of Tree Tales. Awaiting with that, K-State forester Ryan Armbruster. Ryan?
For most of us, winter is a time to think about being inside with family, eating good food, and maybe enjoying a warm fire. And while the trees outside are probably not on our minds, now is a great time to start thinking about taking care of some chores associated with your trees. Without the leaves of summer obscuring the branching structure of your trees, it's a simple matter to observe the framework of limbs that make up your tree's canopy. Winter is an excellent time to prune from the tree's physiological perspective. Pruning before the growing season begins leaves only a short time before the vigorous growth of spring could begin to seal off the wound. In areas where oak wilt has been known to be present, such as parts of eastern Kansas, pruning of oaks should only occur in winter to prevent the spread of the fatal disease to uninfected trees. Pruning in winter can also reduce dieback due to desiccation in crabapples and reduce cankers in honey locust. Some species, such as maple and walnut, may bleed sap when winter pruned, but this is not a cause for concern. If it's an aesthetic concern, some pruning on these species can take place after leaf out in early summer. Different species have different branching patterns and growth habits, but there are a few rules that apply equally to all woody plants. Branches that cross and rub on each other should be removed, as well as any dead limbs. Vigorous water sprouts and suckers are removed for aesthetic reasons, as well as for air circulation to reduce foliar diseases. Just take care to not remove more than 20 to 30% of the overall canopy to avoid stress. Overpruning can cause undesirable form and growth habits as well. The next sunny, pleasant winter day, consider taking a walk outside to scout your trees and plan for winter pruning activities. Now is a great time to get some work done on your trees, and if you hire an arborist to do the pruning for you, remember to ask if they've been certified by the ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture, or the Kansas Arborist Association. You can be assured that these arborists have made a commitment to the best practices of their industry and will do right by your trees. This is Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health and Conservation Forester with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
All right, Ryan, many thanks, and we'll return shortly with more here on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Riley County was awarded a 4-H Youth Futures Grant from the National 4-H Council last year to support a program designed to help inspire underrepresented or at-risk youth to overcome education barriers. Kansas 4-H culture and communication skills specialist Aliah Mestrovich Seay says that Riley County partnered with several organizations and groups, including the First Scholars Program at Kansas State. Aliah, this grant was able to serve 30 youth in Riley County. Tell us a little bit more about the program itself.
4-H Youth Futures is a college and career readiness program that was sponsored by National 4-H Council. We partnered with Riley County 4-H, the Boys and Girls Club of Riley County, as well as the First Scholars First Generation College Student Program at K-State to bring mentoring to 30 underrepresented, underserved youth in Riley County.
Was there a breakout of the underserved youth?
The majority of the youth were Latinx youth and bilingual Spanish-speaking, but we did have a variety of youth that were considered at risk and underserved that needed extra support in their transition from middle school, high school, and beyond.
Why is it important to be exposing them to the possibility of life after high school?
Well, 4-H youth development is all about developing those life skills to be able to transition successfully into adulthood. And with this particular population of youth, we wanted to be able to pair them with somebody that understood their experience and that was also a first-generation college student themselves.
And these are students who have had no one else in their family go on to college. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
So this is their first real introduction then?
That is true. So a lot of the programming centered around interviewing skills. We would have a monthly career spotlight where we would have a guest speaker come in from the community and talk about their vocation. We also did a lot of STEM programming with the youth, and we incorporated the family, extended family, community, and younger siblings into the program.
And when you say STEM, you're talking about what?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
All of which you can find on most college campuses.
That's correct, yes. So we actually had STEM programmers that would come in, particularly from the multicultural engineering department within the College of Engineering at K-State. So they did STEM programming for our youth. And we also had a wonderful site coordinator from Riley County who also did activities with the youth related to college and career readiness.
This was a mentoring program?
Yes. So every mentor was paired with from 1 to 4 youth, with no more than 4 youth per month. It was the same youth throughout that 12 months, and they needed to have 4 hours of direct contact with the youth per month.
Was this kind of a shadowing setup, or how did this work?
Well, we wanted it to be really easy for the mentors to be able to just get into that mentoring relationship and provide that direct service to the youth. So we provided opportunities for them to meet with their mentees twice a month. Once was through the Verde Clovers Riley County 4-H Community Club, where we would meet and they would do activities with the youth. The other time per month was a career spotlight event with a community member sharing and doing hands-on activities with the youth at the Boys and Girls Club of Riley County.
This is a national program, or at least based on a national program?
We do have a curriculum from National 4-H Council that is a 4-H Youth Futures curriculum that's centered in college and career readiness that we used as well.
This has been done in some other counties in Kansas?
Yes, we actually piloted this program in Seward County a couple years ago, and there are other states that are participating in the program as well, namely Missouri, Alabama, and a few other states.
Do we know, are we at the point yet where we're seeing some positive results from this program?
Yes, so we do surveys and assessments throughout the program to show behavioral change in the youth. And we also just kind of take their testimonies of how this impacted them as we go through the grant cycle. And I know that there have been some positive changes and some lasting mentoring relationships that have occurred because of it.
Is this also somewhat eye-opening then, giving them the possibility that there are things they can do that maybe they didn't realize were out there, the opportunities out there?
Yes, I think that even the opportunity to visit K-State, to be on a college campus, we had a couple different events, whether it was K-State Open House or Education Experience Camp, that allowed them to stay overnight, as well as Discovery Days. They attended Discovery Days as well. So just that exposure and, because they don't know what they don't know. And so now they can actually ask questions about the lived experience that they've had with their mentors related to beyond high school.
And the fact that these mentors are people who have been in their shoes, and the fact that they're roughly the same age probably worked out well, too.
I think it does, because most of our mentors were in their early 20s. And so, that's a hop, skip, and a jump, really, from being 15. It seems like a lot of time, but it's really not that much time. So I think the mentors were people that they could look up to and relate to, and I think that's so important.
And people that you can ask questions that you may not want to ask someone who's older.
That's correct, yes. It takes courage to ask questions when you don't know. And so I saw a lot of really solid mentoring relationships that occurred, and we had so many wonderful experiences with them. They'll have some great memories.
In terms of what the youth are learning and how they've reacted to this program, what do you think are some of the key things that they take away from it?
Well, the first would be self-efficacy, that they actually can envision doing new things related to college and career readiness, STEM, and also just developing those life skills. I think youth further developed their leadership abilities and their ability to work on a team. And, all of those things are attributed to positive youth development and also the experiential learning model.
So really something they can take back and practice within their own clubs.
Yes, that is true. And within their communities. There were so many activities that allowed them to explore different career pathways, try things out, practice, and then also just experience and apply. So they really were able to go through those learning pathways that we talk about so that they can see themselves 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Now, is this something that is just a one-year program in Riley County and in the other places where it's happened, or do they continue beyond?
It really depends on how many grants are awarded by National 4-H Council. Riley County is not going to be doing another one this year just due to limited funding from National 4-H Council, but that does not mean that we won't be applying for a Youth Futures grant in the future.
That's Kansas 4-H Culture and Communication Skills Specialist Aliah Mestrovich Seay. To learn more about 4-H programs offered in your community, contact the county or district extension office or go online to kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.